The desert stretched far and wide, glowing beneath the late afternoon sun. The wind carried the scent of sage and dust, brushing softly against the dry grass and whispering through the wooden fence posts that marked the edge of Eli Turner's land. For years, he had listened only to that wind and the slow creak of his old ranch house. He was a man who didn't expect much anymore. After his wife died of fever 3 winters ago, the quiet had filled every room, every morning, every evening. He didn't mind silence. It hurt less than trying to remember laughter. Eli lived simply. He rose before sunrise, fed his horses, fixed fences, and worked the land that had once fed him and his late wife. At night, he sat on his porch with a tin cup of coffee and stared across the dark valley. There, on the far side of the dry creek bed, stood a small adobe house that had been empty for years. But one morning in spring, thin curls of smoke began to rise from its chimney. Someone had moved in. He soon learned that it was Nita, an Apache widow. Folks in town whispered about her quietly. Some said she had lost her husband in a border fight years ago and had come back to the valley for peace. Others said she wanted to live away from the noise of the reservation camps, closer to her ancestors' lands. Eli didn't listen much to gossip, but the sight of her walking near the juniper trees caught his attention more than once. She was calm, almost solemn, her movements quiet and careful, like she belonged to the desert itself. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Sometimes Eli saw her from a distance, gathering herbs near the creek or carrying water back to her house. She saw him too, working his fields, leading his horse, fixing his barn roof. They would nod to each other, nothing more. But something in those silent nods felt heavier than words. 2 lonely souls simply recognizing each other. One afternoon, a storm rolled in fast from the west. The sky turned gray and heavy, and lightning tore across the hills. Eli watched from his porch as the rain hit hard, pounding the valley into mud. He saw her little house through the storm, saw the wind tear at its roof, pulling up loose boards. He thought for a moment, then grabbed his coat and saddled his horse. By the time he reached her place, water was running down the walls. Nita stood outside, trying to hold a blanket over a gap where part of the roof had torn away. Her dark hair was soaked, and she looked up at him in surprise when he rode in. "Ma'am," he called over the rain, "you'll catch your death trying to fix that alone." She hesitated, unsure whether to trust him, but his voice carried no threat, just honest concern. Finally, she nodded, stepping aside as he dismounted. Together, they worked through the storm. He climbed up the side and pushed the broken boards back into place, nailing them down while she held the ladder steady. The rain soaked them both, but neither complained. When it was done, they stood under the small porch, dripping and cold, watching the lightning fade into the hills. "Thank you," she said softly. Her accent was gentle, her English slow but clear. "No one else would have come," Eli nodded. "You'd have done the same for me." That was their first conversation. After that day, things changed in small ways. Sometimes when he rode past her house, she waved. Once, she sent over a small jar of honey and a loaf of cornbread through a local boy who helped carry water between the homesteads. The boy grinned when he handed it over and said, "She told me to tell you it's from her bees." Eli turned the jar in his hand, smiling in a way he hadn't in years. He placed it carefully on the shelf beside his late wife's photograph. That evening, he tasted the honey. It was rich and sweet, and it reminded him that kindness could still exist in the loneliest places. Weeks passed. The valley began to bloom with spring flowers, tiny bursts of yellow and purple among the red rocks. Every morning, Eli noticed Nita's smoke rising from her chimney, and every evening he caught himself glancing toward her home before he went inside. He told himself it was just curiosity, but deep down, he knew better. Then one afternoon, as he finished mending a fence near the creek, the same young boy appeared again, carrying a folded note. Eli wiped his hands and opened it carefully. The handwriting was small and uneven, written in black ink. "Mr. Turner, I wish to speak with you tomorrow at sunset. Only a talk." Nita, he read it twice. A talk? He wasn't sure what to make of it. Maybe she needed help again. Perhaps something about the land or about the water rights between their properties. Still, something about the way she had written only a talk made his chest tighten slightly. That night, he couldn't sleep well. He cleaned his old boots, brushed his horse, and even trimmed his beard the next morning. It felt strange to care about how he looked. When the evening came, he dressed in a clean shirt and rode across the valley. the setting sun painting the sky in colors of fire and gold. Nita was already waiting on her porch. She wore a soft blue shawl over her shoulders, her dark hair braided neatly. The light of the sunset made her skin glow warm like polished stone. Eli dismounted slowly, his heart steady but heavy. "Good evening, ma'am," he said quietly. "Good evening," she replied, her voice low. She gestured toward a small bench beside her door. "Please sit. I made tea." The two sat quietly for a moment, the air filled with the soft chirp of crickets. She handed him a cup made of clay, the surface rough but warm. "I wanted to thank you," she said finally. "That day in the storm, I did not forget. My husband, before he died, always said good men are rare. I think maybe he was right." Eli looked down at his hands. "You don't need to thank me. I just did what anyone ought to do." Her eyes met his. Not everyone does what they ought to. The silence that followed was gentle. Neither of them knew what to say next, but neither wanted the moment to end. The wind moved softly across the desert, carrying the smell of wet earth and cedar. Eli cleared his throat. "You built this house yourself?" "My brother helped," she said. Then he left. "I wanted to stay. My people once lived on these hills. It feels right to return." He nodded. "You chose a good place. The land here remembers kindness," she smiled faintly. "You talk like an old spirit, Mr. Turner." He chuckled softly. "Maybe I am one." They both laughed then, quietly, almost shyly, and the sound felt strange and beautiful against the lonely desert. For the first time in a long time, Eli felt alive. As the sun disappeared behind the mesas, they sat together in the dim glow of the lantern she had lit. The light flickered on her face, and he saw something gentle in her eyes, something like peace mixed with sorrow. When he finally stood to leave, she looked up and said softly, "You are welcome to visit again, if you wish." Eli hesitated, his voice rough. "I might just take you up on that, ma'am." He walked back to his horse and looked once more at her small house. The lantern light still glowed in the window, steady and calm. As he rode home through the quiet night, he realized that the world felt less empty than before. But deep in his chest, a question began to grow. What had truly drawn her to call him that evening? Gratitude? Loneliness? Or something that neither of them yet understood? Eli didn't have the answer. All he knew was that something had changed, and for the first time in years, he didn't mind not knowing what would come next. The next few days after their meeting, Eli Turner found himself thinking about Nita more often than he meant to. Every time he went out to feed his horses or walked past the creek, he caught himself glancing toward her small adobe house. The memory of her soft voice and calm eyes stayed with him. He tried to push the thoughts aside, telling himself it was just respect, maybe curiosity. But something in his chest told him it was more than that. The valley was quiet again, yet the silence didn't feel the same. Before it had been empty. Now it was filled with a strange kind of warmth that followed him around. He began to notice things he hadn't before. The way the morning light touched the red cliffs, the sound of birds near the cottonwood trees, the smell of the earth after rain. Life felt different. One morning, Eli was working near the barn when he heard footsteps behind him. He turned to see Nita walking toward him carrying a basket. Her dress fluttered lightly in the breeze and her hair was tied back neatly. "Good morning, Mr. Turner," she said, smiling a little. "I brought something for you." He wiped his hands on a rag and stepped closer. "You didn't have to, ma'am." She handed him the basket. Inside were fresh tortillas, roasted beans, and a small jar of honey. "It's just food," she said gently. "You helped me. It is right that I share what I have." Eli felt something warm move through him. "Then I'll have to thank you proper," he said with a small grin. "How about you stay a bit?" "I've got coffee brewing." She looked uncertain for a moment, but then nodded. He guided her to the porch, where two chairs faced the wide desert view. They sat quietly while he poured her a cup from his tin pot. The smell of coffee mixed with the clean scent of morning air. They didn't talk much at first. Nita looked out across the valley, her eyes following the hawks circling above the cliffs. "Your land is beautiful," she said softly. "It feels peaceful here." Eli nodded. "It's all I've got left. My wife used to say the land talks if you listen long enough." Nita turned to him with a thoughtful look. She must have been wise. "She was," he said, his voice quiet. "It's been 3 years since she passed. Still feels like yesterday sometimes." Nita bowed her head slightly, showing respect without pity. My husband died too, she said after a pause. Long ago, but the world never forgets. You just learned to walk with the memory. Eli nodded slowly. They didn't need to say more. The silence between them spoke enough. As days passed, their visits became more natural. Sometimes she came by to trade food or herbs from her garden. Other times he rode over to help mend her fence or fix a leaky roof. The people in town started to notice, but Eli didn't care for their talk. He knew how folks could be. Quick to judge, slow to understand. What mattered was that for the first time in years, he didn't feel alone. One afternoon, he found her sitting near the creek, weaving a small basket from reeds. The sound of water trickling over stones mixed with the rustle of leaves. She looked up as he approached. "Mr. Turner," she said softly, "you are working too much. Sit for a while." He laughed quietly and sat beside her on the rock. "If I sit too long, my back will forget what standing feels like." She smiled. "Then your back will thank you." They both laughed. He watched her hands move gently as she wove the reeds together, her fingers steady and graceful. There was something peaceful about the way she worked, like the world slowed down around her. "Where did you learn that?" he asked. "My mother taught me," she said. "She said every basket carries the story of the hands that made it." Eli nodded. "Seems like everything around here has a story. Even the wind." Nita looked at him with a soft expression. "Maybe that is why you are alone so often. You listen to the wind instead of people." He chuckled. "You might be right." Their friendship grew quietly without either of them meaning it to. Some evenings she would light a small fire outside her house and he would ride over after work. They'd share food, talk about old memories, or just watch the stars. The desert nights were beautiful then, the kind of beauty that made you forget the world's troubles for a while. One night, as they sat near the fire, Nita spoke of her husband for the first time. "He was a brave man," she said. "But sometimes bravery makes men walk into storms they cannot return from. When he died, I thought my heart had turned to stone. But the land reminded me that hearts heal when they find new meaning." Eli listened quietly. "You found that meaning here?" She nodded. "Yes, here where my people once lived. And maybe now, through friendship." Her words stayed in his mind long after he rode home that night. Friendship. That's what it was, wasn't it? A friendship born out of shared pain and quiet understanding. Yet when he lay down that night, he couldn't ignore the feeling that something else was slowly forming between them. Something deeper than words. Weeks passed, and the summer heat grew strong. One day Nita came to his ranch with worry on her face. "My water well is almost dry," she said. "I cannot draw enough for the garden." Eli didn't hesitate. "I'll help you dig a new one," he said. "There's an old stream under that hill near your home. Might still run deep." They worked for 3 days under the hot sun, digging through rock and soil. He swung the pickaxe while she carried the loose dirt away. They didn't talk much, but their teamwork spoke louder than words. On the 3rd day, water finally seeped up from the ground. Nita laughed, a sound so bright and pure that Eli couldn't help smiling. "You did it," she said, her face glowing with joy. "We did it," he corrected. She looked at him then, and for a brief moment everything went still. The sunlight shimmered on the water and a quiet warmth passed between them. It wasn't rushed or forced, it was simple, like the feeling of home after years of wandering. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, Nita stood outside her house watching the colors of the sky. Eli stayed beside her, leaning on his shovel. "Thank you, Mr. Turner," she said softly. "You've given me more than water. You've given me hope." He didn't know what to say, so he just nodded. But inside he felt something powerful stir. Something that made him realize how much she had changed his life without even trying. When he rode home, the stars had already filled the sky. He looked back once and saw her standing there in the lantern light, her shawl moving gently in the wind. The sight of her stayed with him the whole night. Over the next few days, Eli tried to keep his distance, unsure of what he felt. But the more he stayed away, the emptier his days became. The laughter, the quiet talks, the warmth, they had become a part of his life. He didn't want to lose that again. One afternoon, as a storm brewed over the hills, he found himself riding toward her home without thinking. She was sitting by the window, watching the clouds gather. When she saw him, her face lit up. "You came," she said simply. "Couldn't stay away?" he admitted with a shy smile. "Thought you might need help closing up before the rain." Together, they secured the windows and covered the firewood. The rain began to fall, gentle at first, then harder. They stood under the porch listening to the soft thunder. It reminds me of the first day we met, she said. Except this time, Eli replied. The roof's holding strong. She laughed softly. Yes, it is. They stood there side by side, the sound of rain filling the silence. It wasn't the same kind of quiet as before. This silence carried peace, comfort, and the unspoken truth that neither of them was truly alone anymore. And as lightning flashed in the distance, Eli realized that sometimes what begins as a simple meeting can turn into something that changes the rest of a person's life. Quietly, without warning, like the first drop of rain before a storm. The storm passed during the night, leaving the valley washed clean. The air smelled fresh and the ground shimmered with thin puddles reflecting the sky. Eli Turner woke early, the sound of rain still echoing faintly in his mind. He couldn't stop thinking about the evening before, how peaceful it had been standing beside Nita, listening to the storm. For the first time in years, he had not felt like a man living alone. He felt part of something again, even if he couldn't yet name what it was. The next morning, he rode out to check the fences near the creek. The land looked beautiful after the rain. The grass stood taller, the wildflowers brighter. When he reached the spot near her home, he saw Nita working in her small garden. She was barefoot, her skirt brushed with mud, her hands deep in the wet soil. She looked up when she heard his horse and smiled. "Good morning, Mr. Turner," she called. "The rain was kind to us this time," he smiled back. That it was. The land needed it. He dismounted and walked closer, watching her tend to the small plants. "You've got a fine garden," he said. "It feeds me," she replied. "And sometimes the heart, too." Her words made him pause. She had a way of speaking that always felt simple yet deep, like every sentence held a quiet truth. As they worked side by side that morning, he helped her clear fallen branches and set up new supports for the climbing beans. They didn't speak much, but the silence between them was full of comfort. When they finished, she handed him a clay cup filled with cool water from her new well. He drank slowly, feeling more at peace than he had in a long time. After that, he started visiting her more often, sometimes to help with chores, sometimes just to sit and talk. They would share stories about their pasts, both the good and the painful. Eli told her about his days as a young ranch hand and how he built his home with his late wife. Nita spoke about her childhood among the hills, learning old songs from her grandmother and how her people honored the land. Every visit brought them closer, though neither said anything about it. They didn't need to. The way they looked at each other said enough. Still, in the small towns around the valley, people began to talk. Eli noticed it first when he went into town for supplies. The general store clerk, an old man named Brooks, gave him a long, knowing look. "You've been spending a lot of time out by the creek lately," Brooks said as he bagged up Eli's flour. "That Apache woman keeps you busy, huh?" Eli didn't like his tone. "Her name's Nita," he said flatly. "And she's my neighbor. That's all." Brooks shrugged, smiling in a way that made Eli's jaw tighten. "Well, you just be careful, Turner. Folks round here still remember the old days. Not everyone's keen on mixing lives with their kind." Eli picked up his bag, his eyes hard. "Then maybe folks should learn to mind their own fences." He left the store without saying more, but the words stuck with him. The valley might have been peaceful, but people's hearts were not always the same. When he told Nita about it, she listened quietly. She didn't look surprised. "I know how they talk," she said softly. "They think I do not hear, but the wind carries words." Eli looked troubled. "If they ever say anything to you," she smiled gently and shook her head. "It does not matter. I have lived through worse. What matters is what we know to be true." He admired her calm. It humbled him how strong she was in silence. Still, the gossip grew. Some ranchers stopped waving when they saw him on the trail. Others whispered when he passed by, but Eli didn't change his path. Each time he saw her, he felt the world grow quieter, steadier, like all the noise of others couldn't reach him there. One evening, she came to his ranch again, carrying a woven basket filled with corn and dried herbs. The sunset spread gold across the sky as they sat together on his porch. The soft wind carried the scent of rain and pine from the distant hills. "You've done much for me, Eli," she said quietly. "I want to do something for you." "You already have," he replied. She smiled but shook her head. "No, I mean something you can keep. Something that reminds you of this place." From the basket, she took out a small pouch made of deerskin. She placed it in his hand. Inside were a few smooth stones, a feather, and a tiny braid of grass tied with red thread. "What is it?" he asked, looking puzzled. It's a blessing, she said softly. My grandmother used to make these. She said when someone finds peace in their heart, they should keep something that carries the spirit of it. Eli looked at the small gift and felt something shift inside him. No one's ever given me something like this before. She looked into his eyes. Then now someone has. He didn't know how to thank her. Words felt too small for the moment. Instead, he placed the pouch in his coat pocket and said quietly, I'll keep it close. As days turned into weeks, their bond deepened. Sometimes she sang old songs by the creek while he worked nearby. He didn't understand the words, but the melody touched something deep in his soul. Other times she would bring food and they'd eat together under the wide desert sky. Life was simple again, but full. One day, while fixing a fence, Eli hurt his hand badly when a nail slipped. The cut was deep and the blood wouldn't stop. He rode straight to Nita's home. She gasped when she saw the wound and quickly led him inside. Sit, she ordered gently. You always help others. Now you let me help you. She washed the wound carefully, her hands steady and calm. Then she crushed some herbs and pressed them gently against the cut, wrapping it with clean cloth. This will heal it, she said. You must not work for a few days. Eli smiled faintly. If I don't work, the horses might start thinking they're the boss. She smiled too. Then they will learn patience, same as you. For the next few days, he stayed mostly at home resting his hand. Nita visited often, bringing food or checking his bandage. Her presence filled the empty spaces of the house. It felt strange but right, as though she belonged there all along. One evening they sat on the porch again, watching the last light fade over the mountains. Eli turned to her, his voice low. Do you ever think about leaving this place? Going somewhere new? She looked out across the land. No, my roots are here, my memories too. And now, my peace, he nodded. You've brought peace to me too. For a long time neither spoke. The air was still, the sky turning deep blue as the first stars appeared. Something unspoken rested between them, like a bridge they were both afraid to cross. But before either could say more, the sound of hooves came from down the trail. 2 riders appeared, men from town. They slowed as they passed the house, giving Nita and Eli a long, cold look. Then one of them spat into the dust and rode off. Eli clenched his jaw. Nita stayed silent, her face unreadable. After they were gone, he turned to her. I'll have a word with them. No, she said softly. Let them be. If you fight with shadows, you only lose the light. He wanted to argue, but saw the quiet strength in her eyes and stopped. She had endured things he couldn't imagine. And still she stood tall. That night, when she left for home, he watched her ride away until the lantern light faded from view. He knew now, deep in his heart, that what had begun as a simple friendship had grown into something neither of them could easily hide. And though the town might not understand, Eli no longer cared. The desert was wide enough for 2 lonely hearts to find each other again, and he wasn't going to let anyone take that away. As the night settled over the land, he touched the small pouch she had given him. It rested close to his heart, warm through the fabric. He whispered softly to himself, Let them talk. I know what's real. Then, under the endless stars of the Wild West, the cowboy finally felt alive again. The days after the riders passed by were quieter, but something had changed in the air. The valley no longer felt as peaceful as before. Eli Turner could feel eyes on him whenever he rode into town for supplies. The whispers had grown stronger, and though no one said anything directly to his face, he could sense what people were thinking. Some nodded politely but avoided his gaze. Others turned their heads away. He had lived in this valley for years and thought he knew everyone, but now he felt like a stranger among his own kind. Nita seemed to sense it too. When he came by her place, she smiled as she always did, but there was a tiredness behind her eyes. She tried to hide it, yet Eli could tell. One afternoon, he found her sitting near the garden, her hands still, the small basket she was weaving lying half-finished in her lap. They look at me as if I don't belong, she said softly without turning her head. But this land was mine before it was theirs. My family's footsteps are in this soil. Eli sat beside her. You belong here more than most of them ever will, he said firmly. She looked at him, her eyes calm but sad. Maybe, but belonging does not stop hate. He didn't know how to answer that. He wanted to tell her she was wrong, that people would see her kindness if they just gave her a chance, but deep down, he knew it wasn't that simple. The world wasn't always kind to those who were different. A few evenings later, when Eli went into town, He found 3 men standing near the saloon, watching him as he tied his horse. He recognized them, ranch hands from nearby homesteads. One of them, a heavy-set man named Wade, called out with a smirk. "Evenin', Turner," Wade said. "Heard you been spending plenty of time with that Apache widow. You setting up a trading post or something?" Eli's jaw tightened. "You mind your tongue, Wade," the man laughed. "Just asking a friendly question. Folks talk, you know. Say she's got you wrapped up like a calf in wire." Eli took a step closer. His voice was calm, but his eyes were cold. "You ever speak her name again with that mouth, I'll make sure you can't." For a moment, no one moved. Then Wade raised his hands in mock surrender. "No harm meant, Turner. Don't get riled up." He smirked again. "Just saying you're making folks uneasy." Eli didn't answer. He climbed back onto his horse, turned it around, and rode home, the anger burning in his chest. He didn't tell Nita about it. He didn't want to worry her. That night, the moon hung low and full, casting a pale light across the desert. Eli sat on his porch, turning the small pouch she had given him over in his hand. He thought about the life he had lived before. Quiet, lonely, without anyone to care for or protect. Then he thought about her. About her laugh, her calm strength, the way her presence made his world feel whole again. He made up his mind that night. Whatever people said, he wasn't turning away. The next morning, he rode to her house. She was outside grinding corn near the porch. When she saw him, she smiled faintly, though her eyes searched his face. "You look troubled," she said. "Some of the townsfolk are talking too much," he admitted. "I don't care about them, but I don't like the idea of them thinking they can scare you." She shook her head slowly. "Let them talk. Words cannot hurt me." He looked at her for a moment. "Maybe not, but I still don't trust the kind of men who use words to hide what they really want to do." She didn't argue, but her silence said she understood. After a moment, she asked softly, "Will you stay for breakfast?" He nodded. She led him inside, where the scent of fresh bread filled the air. Her home was simple, neat, warm, full of small details that showed care. A woven blanket on the wall, clay pots she'd shaped herself, a small wooden cross hanging near the window. It felt like peace itself. As they ate, they talked about small things, the harvest, the weather, her bees. But behind every word was the unspoken understanding that the peace they shared might not last forever. Later that day, while helping her repair a small shed behind the house, they heard horses in the distance. Eli looked up and saw 2 riders approaching. He recognized Wade and one of his friends. They stopped a few yards away, their eyes sharp and full of something ugly. "Afternoon, Turner," Wade said, dismounting. "Didn't think you'd be out here again." Eli straightened. "What do you want?" Wade shrugged. "Just curious is all. Heard the lady makes fine bread. Thought maybe she'd share." Nita stood quietly near the shed, watching them. Her expression didn't change, but her hands tightened on the edge of the table. "She's got nothing for you," Eli said. Wade smirked. "Didn't ask you." He turned to Nita. "Well, ma'am, you gonna offer a man some of that Apache kindness?" Eli stepped between them before she could speak. "You heard her, leave." For a moment, Wade's expression hardened. Then he laughed and climbed back on his horse. "You're picking the wrong side, Turner. Don't say you weren't warned." They rode off, dust rising behind them. Eli turned to Nita. "You all right?" She nodded slowly, though her eyes stayed fixed on the horizon. "They will not stop," she said quietly. He looked at her for a long moment, his voice firm. "Then they'll have to go through me first." That night, Eli stayed nearby. He made camp by the creek, close enough to watch her home but far enough not to intrude. The moonlight shimmered on the water as he sat beside the fire, listening to the night sounds. Somewhere far away, a coyote howled. He kept his rifle near, not because he wanted to fight, but because he wouldn't allow fear to take root here. The following morning, Nita came to where he was sitting, carrying a bowl of corn porridge. "You did not have to stay," she said softly. He smiled a little. "Didn't have to, but I wanted to." She looked down at him for a moment, then sat beside him. "You remind me of the cottonwood trees," she said quietly. "They stand through every storm, but they bend when the wind asks them to. That is strength." He looked at her, unsure how to reply, but her words settled deep in his heart. Over the next few days, he noticed how careful she had become. She stopped going to town, traded less, and stayed close to home. The joy that once lit her face when she laughed seemed dimmer now. Eli hated seeing that. One evening, he decided to do something about it. He rode into town not to argue but to make himself seen. He walked into the saloon where Wade and his men usually drank. The room went quiet when he stepped inside. Eli stood at the bar, ordered a coffee, and turned to face them. "If anyone's got something to say about me or Nita, now's the time," he said evenly. The men looked at each other. Wade's smirk faded. No one spoke. Eli nodded slowly. "Didn't think so." He left his coin on the counter and walked out. From that day forward, no one said much to his face. Some still whispered, but the open mockery stopped. The message was clear. Eli Turner wouldn't bend to gossip or hate. When he told Nita about it, she sighed softly. "You risked much for me." He shook his head. "For us," he said. "Because what we got here, it's worth fighting for." She smiled faintly, her eyes glistening in the firelight. "Then we will face whatever comes together." That night they sat outside as the stars filled the sky. The desert was quiet again, only the wind moving softly through the grass. The troubles of the town felt far away. Eli looked at her, the firelight dancing across her face. "You know," he said, "when I first saw you out here, I didn't expect any of this. I thought I'd just be fixing a roof." She smiled. "And now?" He hesitated, then said quietly, "Now I think maybe that roof wasn't the only thing that needed repair." Her eyes met his, and though neither said another word, both knew what he meant. Two hearts, once broken by loss, had found something whole again. And as the fire burned low and the stars shone brighter above them, Eli understood that no matter what the valley whispered, this was where he belonged, beside her, in the land that had healed them both. Autumn came to the valley with cool winds and golden light. The air smelled of dry leaves and wood smoke, and the sound of distant coyotes echoed softly through the evenings. For Eli Turner, the season brought a strange calm. The fields were quiet, the horses were healthy, and most of the gossip in town had finally died down. Yet even with the peace around him, he knew the story between him and Nita was not over. It was still unfolding, as gentle and unpredictable as the desert wind. He rode out to her place almost every morning now, helping with small chores or bringing supplies she needed. The rhythm of their days had become familiar, steady and full of quiet moments that said more than words. Sometimes they worked together in silence. Sometimes they shared stories. Sometimes they just sat by the creek, listening to the water flow. It felt as though the world had stopped demanding explanations. Still, a shadow lingered at the edge of things. The men who once mocked them stayed away, but resentment never vanished so easily. Eli could feel it when he went into town. A few stares still followed him. A few whispers still floated behind his back. He ignored them, but he never forgot. One cold morning, as frost covered the grass, Nita came to his ranch wrapped in a gray shawl. Her face was pale and serious. "There has been trouble," she said softly. "Someone broke the fence near my chicken pen last night." The birds scattered. Eli frowned. "You think it was the wind?" She shook her head. "No wind cuts wire." He felt anger rise, but he kept his voice calm. "I'll ride out there now." When they reached her property, the damage was plain. The fence had been cut clean through and there were boot tracks in the dirt. Whoever had done it had come deliberately. Eli looked around carefully, studying the ground, his eyes narrowing. "They're trying to scare you," he said quietly. "Or me." Nita stood straight, her chin lifted. "Fear does not live here anymore." He looked at her, admiring her strength, but he couldn't shake the unease growing inside him. After fixing the fence, he built a stronger gate and stayed late into the evening. When he finally left, he promised he would return the next day to check again, but the trouble didn't stop. 2 nights later, someone left a broken arrow stuck into her doorframe. It wasn't Apache, it was meant to mock her. Nita found it early in the morning and brought it to Eli. He held it in his hands for a long moment, silent. Then he set it down gently. "This ends now," he said. She placed her hand on his arm. "Eli, don't go looking for them. They want you angry." He looked at her, his eyes soft but determined. "I ain't looking for a fight, Nita. I'm looking for peace, and sometimes peace don't come unless you stand up for it." That afternoon, he rode into town. The streets were quiet, only a few people outside. He went straight to the sheriff's office. The sheriff, a broad-shouldered man with a gray beard, looked up when Eli entered. "Morning, Turner," he said. "What brings you in?" Eli told him everything, the fence, the arrow, the threats. The sheriff listened, rubbing his chin. "I'll keep an eye out," he said finally. "But you know how folks are around here. Some still carry old ways in their heads, can't change what they don't want to see. Maybe, Eli said, but you can remind them what's right. The sheriff nodded slowly. I'll send word around. You just stay calm. Eli thanked him and left, but he knew words alone might not be enough. That evening, he went back to Nita's. The sun was setting behind the mesas, the sky painted in streaks of orange and purple. She was sitting by the fire outside, her shawl wrapped tight around her shoulders. He joined her quietly. Did the sheriff help? She asked. He'll try, Eli said. But we'll help ourselves too, she smiled faintly. You sound like my grandfather. He used to say a heart with courage needs no sword. Eli chuckled softly. Your grandfather sounds wiser than most men I've met. They sat together, the firelight flickering between them. After a while, Nita said, Do you ever regret helping me that first day? Maybe your life would be easier if you hadn't. He shook his head slowly. If I hadn't, I'd still be a man talking to empty walls. You brought life back to this land, Nita. To me, too. Her eyes softened. And you gave me safety when the world looked away. A gentle silence followed. The desert around them glowed in the last light of dusk. The next few weeks passed quietly. The trouble seemed to stop and winter settled in. Frost covered the ground each morning and smoke curled from the chimneys like ribbons of gray silk. Eli and Nita worked side by side, cutting wood, fixing roofs, and keeping warm. Sometimes she visited his ranch and cooked by the fireplace while he read aloud from an old book his wife had left behind. They were two souls who had known loss, learning that comfort could still exist after sorrow. One night, as snow began to fall over the valley, Eli woke to the distant sound of horses. He grabbed his coat and stepped outside. The moonlight made the land glow white, and he saw movement down by the creek. 3 riders moving fast toward Nita's home. He didn't hesitate. He saddled his horse and rode hard through the cold wind. When he reached her house, the riders were already there, standing in front of her porch. He saw the glint of lantern light on their faces. It was Wade and his men again. Stay inside, Nita, he shouted as he rode up. Wade turned, startled. Turner, this ain't your business. It became my business the moment you brought it here, Eli said, dismounting. The men exchanged glances, uneasy under his steady gaze. He didn't draw his gun, he didn't need to. There was something in his stance, calm but unshakable, that made them hesitate. You think you can scare a woman living peaceful on her land? Eli said quietly. You're smaller men than I thought. One of them muttered, We just came to talk. Then talk from your saddles, Eli said, his voice steady. And when you're done, you'll ride out of here and not come back. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Wade's shoulders slumped. She don't belong here, he said weakly. Eli's eyes didn't waver. She belongs where she chooses. Same as any of us. Something in his tone broke the tension. The men turned their horses and rode off into the dark. Eli stood there for a while, watching until they disappeared into the distance. Then he turned toward the house. Nita stepped out slowly, her face pale in the moonlight. They are gone? He nodded. They won't be back. She looked at him for a long moment, then said softly, You could have been hurt. He smiled faintly. Not tonight. She came closer, the snow falling gently around them. You risked much again, she said. Why do you do this? Eli looked into her eyes. Because peace matters. And because you do. Her eyes filled with quiet emotion, but she said nothing. She reached out and touched his arm lightly. The gesture was small, but it carried everything they had both left unspoken. From that night on, no one bothered them again. The winter passed, and the valley slowly turned green once more. The gossip faded like smoke in the wind. People began to see Nita not as a stranger, but as part of the land, someone who worked hard, helped others, and brought calm wherever she went. Eli and Nita's friendship became something steady and unshakable. They didn't speak of love, but it lived quietly between them, like a river running deep beneath the surface. Some days they worked together on his ranch, other days on hers. In the evenings, they sat under the stars, sharing stories or simply watching the sky. One evening in spring, as the desert bloomed again with wildflowers, Nita looked at him and said softly, You once said you didn't know what would come next. Do you know now? He smiled, his eyes warm. I reckon I do. Whatever it is, I'd rather face it with you. She nodded slowly, her smile gentle and full of peace. Then the land has given us both what we needed. The sun dipped behind the mesas and the light turned golden. Eli took off his hat, looked across the wide valley, and felt the kind of quiet that didn't come from being alone. It came from being home. The wind moved softly through the grass, carrying with it the scent of spring and the promise of peace. For the first time in many years, Eli Turner's heart felt whole. He had lost much in life, but in that quiet corner of the Wild West, beside a woman who had known her own share of sorrow, he had found something worth living for again. And as the stars appeared one by one over the valley, the cowboy and the widowed Apache woman sat side by side, no longer two lonely souls but one story written across the desert sky, proof that even in the hardest lands, kindness and courage could still plant roots that would never die.